Hello, everyone, and welcome to another presentation of the Luso American Education Foundation Conference, our third session for this opening day. This is the 45th conference of the Luso American Education Foundation, an organization that is basically national because we also have an East Coast presence in the United States. But the Luso American Education Foundation is over 50 years old, and the conferences began 45 years ago, 1977. I know some of you were not born, but some of us were around and living and actually already adults in 1977. And so the conference began as part of the bilingual education movement that was in full force in California in the 1970s, and then it went by the wayside in the 1980s, part of the latter part of the 1980s, and of course the conference took on a different role, but it continues to be a conference focusing on education and culture, focusing on the Portuguese experience. And in this case, this year's theme is the Portuguese diaspora in North America, looking at heritages, at identities, and at outlooks, and all plural because we do have various heritages and our identities are certainly different. Even those who are immigrants as myself, and I believe Esmeralda also came at a very young age, but is an immigrant, and our chairman of the board. Those of us who are immigrants, we are no longer the same as if we had stayed in the Azores or mainland Portugal. We are different. Our identities are a bit mixed with the rich variety of the US or Canada. And so I want to thank all of the panelists here. I want to thank our chairman of the board, Joseph Rezendes, for being here. Joseph, would you like to just begin with a couple of welcome remarks, and then we will the panelists will introduce themselves. You're on mute, Joseph. That happens to me all the time. It's okay. There's a little button on the bottom that says mute. It shows a microphone. It should be red. You just click on it. There you go.
Bottom left.
Okay.
Okay. Well, good. Well, welcome everyone. I'd love to see you guys in this session. I was here all day today, off and on, but I got the gist of all these sessions, and so I know your sessions will be equally as good as the previous sessions. And I am the chairman of the board at this time with the Luso American Education Foundation. I have been involved with the foundation probably for the past 27, 28 years. That's because I was also working for Luso American Financial. So I was working for Luso American Financial, and at the same time, through the years, I was also the director of the foundation. I skipped a few years, but then came back again, and now I am retired, and I'm still involved with the Educating Foundation, and just welcome.
Thank you, Joseph. And so we will begin to take a little tour around the Zoom squares. Once again, thanks to all of you who are here on the webinar. Thanks to those of you who are following us on the social media platforms. And thanks to the Televisão Portuguesa da Califórnia, TVP California, João Manuel Dias, who is live streaming the event, has been live streaming all day long through their television service, and we appreciate that immensely. And through their Diaspora media group, the sound as well. So we all of our events, of course, are on social media through Facebook Live. We are also will be on YouTube recorded, and most importantly, the conference is being archived by the Oral History Project at California State University, Fresno. So all of our sessions are archived. So hopefully historians and those who want to study the community 50, 60 years from now can look at what we have done and maybe make sense of what the community looks like 50, 60 years from today. So we're going to start with brief bios by each and every one of the presenters, each and one of the panel members. And I'm going to start with Dr. Sarah Vieira. And if you'll introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself, Sarah, please.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dinesh. Thank you for the invitation. Hi, everyone. I'm really honored to be here, and I'm really excited as well. My name is Sarah Zabalviera. I finished my PhD in November of 2020, kind of in this atmosphere on Zoom, from the University of British Columbia. In Okanagan, I worked with Dr. Carlos Teixeira, the geographer, well-known full professor at UBC. And my research was on the Portuguese diaspora and transnationalism in Canada. And I looked at themes such as bilingualism, how people connect with migration, and some themes that came up were, seniors in the community, youth, and others that kind of developed from my research. Right now, since completing my PhD, I'm teaching sessionally at Alexander College out in Burnaby, BC, and I'm currently in Toronto. So I'm also working at Seneca College as an instructional designer. So I'm getting more into kind of the admin stuff around higher education. So that's a little bit about me. Thank you.
Good, fantastic. We need to have more young Portuguese Americans not only teaching at the university level, but in your case, leading. Indeed, we don't have enough Portuguese Americans in leadership positions in universities. So hopefully we will see you there soon, leading one of the major universities in Canada. Or hey, why not the States as well? So that's right. There's always opportunities. It depends. So welcome, Sarah, and congratulations on your PhD. And we'll turn to Matthew Correia, who is a dynamic force in the Portuguese community in Canada.
Thank you. Boa noite a todos, all the way from São Miguel, Azores, where I am right now, and it's 12:17 a.m., but that's okay. I am Matthew Correia, a well-known talk show host, presenter, co-host of Gente Nossa TV, which is the eldest Portuguese television program, which is produced by Nelly Pedro, who was just on the live about an hour or so ago. And so I've been on the Portuguese television now for 11 years as co-host. But before that, it all started through folklore. I was a dancer and now president of one of the folklore groups, Pérolas do Atlântico, of Casa dos Açores in Ontario, and involved in the community through Casa dos Açores as well. I was one of the board members for 10 years. And also am currently the special projects manager of the Federation of Portuguese Canadian Business and Professionals, where I met Sarah Vieira, who was one of the scholarship winners, and so leading in that aspect as well. Most recently, in May of this year, I was elected to counselor of the Azorean Diaspora, which is a project run by the regional government of the Azores. And so my involvement is more community-based and with multiple generations of from the youth, adults, and seniors, and all of the projects that I've been involved with.
Thank you, Matthew, and thanks for staying up so late. We can excuse you to go have a bica if you need to do that throughout the presentation. Já tens aí. É o chá da Gorriana, that's right. And Leslie, Dr. Leslie Vicente from Discovery, a language school, which is world famous. It's not just famous in Massachusetts, it's world famous. Welcome, Leslie. I think.
Thank you. You're exaggerating it. First of all, thank you for having me. Hello, everybody. It's nice to meet you all. So my name is Leslie Rivera Vicente. I was actually born in San Diego, California. And then I moved to the Azores, I don't know, maybe 6 months. I don't remember. So then I immigrated into my own country. So I consider myself an immigrant in the USA, even though that's where I was born. I have a doctoral degree in educational leadership and public policy. Sarah, I thought your dissertation is a great topic. Mine was not. Mine was on the banning of ethnic studies in the state of Arizona to our Portuguese histories and our Portuguese heritages, because I think it's really, really important that our kids, and I mean our students today, learn about the influence of the Portuguese in our culture. It doesn't have to be necessarily going back to the history of the Azores, but what our grandparents, what our parents, when they, built here. So I run the Discovery Language Academy in New Bedford. It's a community school. It's a Escola Oficial Portuguesa in New Bedford. When I first started, it was a little bit of a little school. Now we've gotten a little bit, I guess, bigger, but it's all because, and we can talk about, it's all about relationships and working with other people in the community, and really forcing ourselves as a force, as a Portuguese force in a community, by working with other organizations. So I work at the school, I work on projects, I work with a lot of organizations. I try to work with everyone for the betterment of the school and our culture and our language. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leslie. And back to Canada now to Esmeralda Cabral, who is coming to us from Vancouver, and who is also, I might add, an awesome writer with the most wonderful memoir that she read a bit from it a few weeks ago in an event that we had for the Gagaho Colloquium, and we hope to see it published soon. Esmeralda.
Thank you, Denise. Yeah, and I was so excited to think that Sarah, when you were saying you're UBCO and Burnaby, but you're not in Vancouver, are you? No. Okay, well,
Toronto.
Greetings all. So my name is Esmeralda Cabral, and it's a mouthful in English or in Portuguese, and in Portuguese. I was born in São Miguel and came with my family to Canada when I was 7 years old. We immigrated to a city called Edmonton, which is very far away from the ocean, so Edmonton, Alberta. And when I lived there, when we arrived, I think there were 8,000 Portuguese people in town. So I did all the things. I went to Portuguese school and I danced folklore. And yeah, we went to all the festas and everything. And then as an adult, I moved to Vancouver when I got married. And now I don't do all the things. I'm not very connected to the Portuguese community here, sadly, just because of geography and a number of other things. So I feel like I straddle two worlds. I'm like the old generation who came and was very involved, and now I'm sort of like my kids who don't have as much access to the Portuguese community here. I've had several incarnations as an environmental consultant, as I taught English for a while, and now I'm a writer. As Tanish said, I've just finished my my first book-length manuscript and hoping to get it out there sometime soon.
Indeed. And so a wonderful piece that Esmeralda read for us here a few weeks ago. And last but certainly not least, we're coming back home to California to Dr. Linda Carvalho Cooley. Linda, a little bit about yourself, please.
And speaking of just coming back to California,
yes,
I was in Terceta allowed to teach online this semester, well, last semester and this semester. So I decided to stick around on the island for a while. So I was doing what Matthew's doing up at midnight and 1 a.m. to meet with students. I have a doctorate in educational leadership and mainly focused on community college education and strategic planning in education in community colleges. I also have a master's in communication studies. I teach full-time at Reedley College, communication studies. I developed the intercultural communication courses there and persuasive courses. And I also did a communication theory course. And I also launched a computer mediated communication course there as well. I also moonlight at Fresno State as a guest lecturer where I teach upper division courses. I call that my hobby because even though it's work, I love it. And I get to play with theories at a much deeper level with students who are mainly seniors, communication majors mostly, but also some educational majors. So I am a natural born California as person, but I always felt like I straddled two worlds as well. My father was a fairly well-known Portuguese radio broadcaster. And we spent a great deal of time on the island of Terceta, also visiting some of the other islands where my father would interview people and bring the recordings back to play on his radio program here. So my world was very much entrenched, and my first language was actually Portuguese, but I learned English as I was in school. So, and now I'm back kind of really enjoying being a part of my Portuguese community. So that's me.
Indeed, thank you. And more than a radio personality, he was a radio icon, Antonio Carvalho. So we will tackle our first topic to kind of discuss a little bit, which is part of our title, Connecting Generations. The past day and the sessions that we had in the morning and the afternoon that Chairman Rezendes mentioned, basically we have been tackling this issue for a while in the Portuguese American and the Canadian American and Portuguese Canadian community. That is the Portuguese diaspora in North America. How do we get young people involved? There aren't too many Zabalviera or Matthew Correias that are involved in the community, and there's a couple of different issues, as we know, and some of it is demographics as well. Leslie mentioned Arizona, where at one time, and the West Coast, and at one time there was only just a few thousand Portuguese Americans in Arizona. Now, according to not the latest census that we have in the United States, but the census of 2010, there's over 20,000, and so people are changing, living in different states, and I'm sure in different provinces in Canada as well. There is no longer the traditional area just in that certain area of Toronto or that certain area in Montreal or New Bedford or Fall River or even San Jose, California, which is a city that was widely known for the Portuguese community and is now totally different than what it was 25, 30, 40 years ago. So because people are obviously they're changing, the demographics are changing, and folks are living in areas that were not considered traditionally Portuguese, even within the city. They may be living in a different area. I would like to ask you, first of all, how do we connect to younger generations? And I'll start with Matthew because he has a world of knowledge there. How do you feel that we can connect the young people to the more seasoned generation, and how do young people look at the traditions and at the different levels that we know the community to be? And second question would be, do we emphasize too much on tradition and not enough on innovation? Because tradition was probably very important, and it was very important for my parents. That's how they survived in the Portuguese American community when they came at the ages of 33 and 38 to the United States. But it means a different thing to me, and certainly means a different thing to my children and my grandchildren that I now have. It means something totally very, very vague. And so I'll start with Matthew. Matthew, any ideas on how you see the community today and how you see us moving forward with connecting the various generations, connecting your generation and even younger than you with the experience of the older generations? And is that even something that's remotely possible in your opinion?
Absolutely. I think that we have to connect the youth with things that they like to do. With, for example, soccer. There's a lot of Portuguese youth that are involved in soccer clubs. In folklore as well, even though we're seeing a decline in youth participation in Ontario, primarily in Azorian folklore. I mean, I'm president of the only Azorian folklore in Ontario, and we have struggling to get youth involved. But we have to go after the ones that do like it and promote it to them, and why it's cool to be involved, and why we don't want to let that heritage, that piece of us, die off. We want it to continue. We also need the youth to get involved in clubs and associations, in different organizations in our communities. And to do that, we have to allow them to come up with their own ideas, their own creative input, and modify some of our traditional ways of doing things. And that's going to be hard, because then you have the older generation very stuck in their ways, wanting to do things a certain way, not being as open. But I think that we're coming a long way. There's a lot more second, third generation leaders, presidents of these organizations that are more open to ideas. We also have to go after social media, and that's where all the youth are these days, and really promote why it's again, cool to be Portuguese. And even through my travels and all of my social media posts and everyone saying, oh my gosh, where's that? Where's this? What are you eating? I remember when I was, doing that at that age, and a lot of people, and to this day, and I brought this up a couple times during my candidacy as a councillor of the Azorean Diaspora, is that people think, especially with the Azores, that they're going to come back to just go and see their titias and vaquinhas, right? Which is not true. Yes, they're still here, thankfully, and they're a huge part of the islands. But we also need to promote the islands of today and what there is to do, which is also one of the reasons why I'm here vacationing and also working, which is to organize the first cannabis conference in the Azores.
Wow, interesting.
Sunday. It's called Canazores. That's together with Dr. Graça Castanho, who was the former regional director of the communities, also with the various organizations, Zabalviera, Associação Agrícola, to try to promote hemp here and the cultivation and production of that here, which is something I hear from a lot of youth, is that, hey, where can I get my weed, or where can we get for medical benefits as well, and it's still not something that's very spoken about and promoted here. It's still very taboo. But going back to what was your second question, Denise?
I think you answered it well, which is, how do you get youth involvement? And I mean, in that the project of the cannabis in the Azores is something that connects people, really.
Absolutely.
Yeah, indeed, indeed. And so I'm going to turn to Sarah. Your research and for your doctorate obviously involves some aspects of this, of connecting the various generations. Matthew mentioned that at sometimes there's a certain segment of the seasoned generations, I like to call it. It's a way for people not to call me old also. So the seasoned generation has sometimes a problem letting go, and they're the only ones that know how to do this and how to do that. They're the only ones that can run an organization. You don't understand how, I've heard this many times, even in my youth, you do not understand how, for example, we do this kind of an event because you were very young when we started and you don't know how this is done. So did you find in your research that connecting generations can be challenging, and what have you found, and also your experiences in the Portuguese Canadian community? Your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. So that was one of the biggest, I would say, challenges in my research, because I interviewed all of the community centers that were active during the time of my research period. I did confront a lot of this sort of tension between the people who run the everyday show and the people who may want to, have some commentary or something to say about how things happen. And, because I have a Portuguese last name and because my parents are Portuguese, I was often welcomed and assumed that I knew everything that was going on. Even though my upbringing was very much separated from the community, my parents weren't very involved, although Portuguese was my first language and we went to church. We weren't really involved in the Portuguese community in the way that Matthew was, raised in the community. And so I was sort of an outsider in many respects, learning. And it took me actually doing the work, stepping into a board position at the Federation of Portuguese Canadian Business and Professionals after I won a scholarship, to realize how much work it is. So I get the tensions there when, you've been there for 20 years, you've put your heart and soul and every weekend into this. And there are people who may have negative comments to make, or sometimes just constructive criticism that may be perceived as a comment. One of the themes that I struggled with in my research as well was exactly what you mentioned in the beginning, Denise, this kind of separation or this movement. So the Portuguese community in the GTA and the Greater Toronto area is very much dispersing. We are not in Little Portugal anymore. It is extremely gentrified. You wouldn't recognize it today than if you looked at it in the 70s or the 80s. And so understanding the role of space and how that comes to play when we look at community is really important, because we have Portuguese youth being raised in smaller towns, in smaller cities, and they don't have that access to the community as their parents may have or their grandparents may have. So I echo Matthew in the social media sense. I follow Discovery Language Academy, and I have to say, amazing. I'm always like, why aren't we doing this? We should be doing stuff like this in Canada. You know, I'm so happy that I meet someone from there, because it's phenomenal what happens with social media in so many organizations in the United States. But I think we don't do as well here, and we can do it as well with promoting events and promoting things. The final thing I'll say is that my involvement in the community started with a scholarship. So it started with people who were from an older generation, who were successful, who gave back and gave me a scholarship. And that's what got me involved in the Federation for the last 5 years that I've been on the board. And that was a way for me to reciprocate and give back, but also get involved and get to know, what's going on in the community. So I feel like some of this reciprocity, I've now revamped an essay contest with the Federation for the last 2 years, and tried to collect or connect younger youth, so grade 7 to grade 12, in writing an essay about their Portuguese heritage to the community. And finally, I think from my research, I learned that many youth, like Matthew said, are really interested in the Portugal of today. They want to go back, they want to visit, they want to learn more, and they want to know what's going on today. So they hear stories, and they may love the stories that they hear, and I think they're valuable and absolutely important for things like identity and our heritage, but also, the kind of cosmopolitan, really interesting new things that are happening. I think is a good way, like an annual trip, sort of like a birthright, getting youth back to their roots. Would be a really interesting project that we could sort of get these, literally people moving in place and space, and learning about their roots in other ways.
Indeed, that's a very good idea, actually, in a different manner, but the Jewish community does that very well here in the United States. They take every year a group of Jewish Americans, and they spend 3 weeks or 4 weeks, depending on the program, paid by the Israeli government, which, of course, we know has different funding than the Portuguese government has, but it is something that is worthwhile. And I think sometimes in the Portuguese American community, sometimes the Portuguese and the Azorean government and the Benedict government as well will spend some money on issues that are not already pertinent to this young generation. And it really sometimes isn't that much to do some kind of maybe an association movement with our associations here, and establishing a funding for North America where we allow a group, even if it's just 10 students from each country, 10 from the US and 10 from Canada, to go to Portugal for a 3-week, to connect those who don't have the opportunity to connect for 3 weeks. Imagine if we do that for 10 years, you have 200 people throughout the US and Canada that have a different perception. So that's a great idea, Sarah. Linda, your aspects, of course, as a communication professor, how do we communicate? I mean, you came from a family of communicators with your dad and your mom, and she was also involved in radio, but certainly your dad. And so how do we connect the various generations? And your experience, of course, here in the Valley and here in California, we're running into a situation that Sarah mentioned, and Matthew as well, which is the younger generation really is not involved. And when there is some younger generation involved, it seems like it's the same 20 kids that are the same 20 or 25 kids are in folklore, and they are in band, and they are in this, and they are in that. And so how do we go beyond what was done, and salvage, all the great work that has been done by prior generations?
I as I was listening to Matthew and Sarah, I was thinking how, especially I loved when Matthew said that it's not the same Azores. It's not the same Azores. And I think that that's really important for all of us to remember, that we can't present what our heritage is as what it was necessarily. We have to get them to celebrate what it is to be Portuguese today. And if you go to the islands or you go to the mainland, you see a lot of young people wearing American style clothing and listening to French music and British pop music and rap music. And they very much want to embrace something new as well. And I think that, I think if all you paint of the Azores is folklore and bullfights and as velhas, I'm thinking of some of the cantorias and stuff. I think that that's not going to be something that's going to excite the younger people. I love the social media connection. I think that's a great idea. But also there's some wonderful music that comes out of some young Portuguese artists. And I know my father played all the big hits of the time period. And I think music has a very powerful way of connecting people. I love the idea of taking people there and having them visit. I think that's a great idea. But I think when it comes right down to it, the language. We miss out so much if we cannot truly communicate in the language. And if there were ways for us to get people to understand and speak more Portuguese, I don't really know how we would push this further, but I think that there's I say it all the time, it's the greatest gift my father ever gave me was the ability to speak two languages. And I remember even when my grandparents, my mom's parents passed away, my cousins, none of them spoke Portuguese. And when it came time to close up the house and going through little items, I pretty much said I didn't need anything because I had the stories. My cousins couldn't understand what my grandparents were talking about, but I could. And it was such a beautiful gift. And I think that if we could get more young people to speak, even if that's what we did, is to get some money to enroll students, young Portuguese students, into classes just to learn how to speak, I think that would make a huge difference. And I'm not sure how or where we could take that, but I think that not being able to talk or speak the language and connecting. When I was younger, I mean, we just went there and you played. You went outside and played with all the other neighborhood kids. And if there was a word you didn't know, you figured it out because you wanted to play. So connecting people, even young people, young Portuguese citizens, the young people in the Azores would love to talk to Americans, their American counterparts, and share what they love and try to speak some English and encourage them to speak Portuguese back. I think partnering, mentoring, connecting people, but I think when it comes right down to it, the best thing we could do for them is give them the language. But I love all the ideas of the social media. I love them bringing the music to them, bringing those young, energetic things, and also pointing out that Portugal is not stuck in that same age bracket that it was, that we all have that vision. And I remember a very wise person once told me that the further you get away from something, the harder it is for you to really realize how it's evolved. And what happens is I'm first generation, so I'm fairly close. I'm not an immigrant, but I'm first generation. But I think when you meet these people that are 6, 7, 8 generations down, and they've been running the festa the same way over and over, and they want to replicate it because they think that's what it is. And the truth is, and I think all of you can speak to this, soupage here in California is not what soupage are in the Azores. But somebody brought it, changed it, modified the spices and made it, and they said, this is the way it is. And I think sometimes we forget that what we're doing, we forget the reason why we're doing it. And we just do it. We do the ritual, but we don't understand the meaning and the message and the connection. The point was to socialize, to connect, to communicate, to share stories. And I think that's where we need to move to. And the hardest part's going to be the resistance of the people not wanting to give up the way that they've always done things before.
Indeed, indeed. But I'm glad you mentioned language, because that's something that we'll tackle as well, because the idea, of course, would be that everyone would speak some Portuguese if you are of Portuguese background, but that's kind of utopian in a way because of a lot of generations that the language has been lost. I mean, indeed, when we look at, and I think Canada's having the same issues that we have here, when you look at third and fourth generation, very little of the language is left behind. But that's where Leslie comes in and discovery. So I know that you've done a lot of different outreach and community partnerships and connecting with different generations, not just the kids. You have actually language classes for adults, and then you have language classes, I believe, in English for Portuguese. So you have this mix of different things, and you took as you said, and kudos to you. You are a leading example in the United States and Canada, which is you took a small school and just developed it into a project that's internationally known. So tell us a little bit how you've used, and of course, tomorrow we're going to talk exclusively about language programs, but how you've used the language aspect, the school, to connect generations. I've always said that every single Portuguese hall, which some of you don't know, the concept is a little bit different, the halls here than they are in Canada or the East Coast, but Leslie knows, being in San Diego, from San Diego, the Portuguese hall, I've always said if the Portuguese hall is having an issue surviving, the best thing is start a Portuguese language school, because then the parents are taking the kids over to the school, and they, if they're disconnected with the hall, hey, now they're connecting once a week or twice a week to the Portuguese hall. So if every single Portuguese hall in California, and there's about 85 of them, had a Portuguese language school, even if it was just once a week, even if it's just once a week, it would be one way to bring those young people, that younger generation, that is hard to bring in. And when we're talking about, especially those who are just starting families, who are in their late 20s or early 30s, and they're starting families, and their mid 30s, and they have kids who are now 7, 8, 9 years old, and they don't want, they're not connected to the Portuguese organization. If there was a school there, that would be one way to connect. And Leslie, you've done a great job there. So tell us a little bit how you've connected the different generations using language, basically.
Thank you, Denise. First of all, I don't know how my internet connection is, and it was a little off a little while ago, so I apologize. This is what happens when you upgrade your internet to make it better. It gets worse. When it comes to Portuguese and, getting kids or adults, especially in the kids, you have to trick them. You have to be really tricky. You have to come up with these, especially preschool, kindergartens, you have to come up with these ways that they're fun, and you're fooling them. They think they're playing and they're singing, but they're not. They're learning the language. Before you know it, they already know numbers, they already know colors, and you keep going. We use a lot of activities, we use a lot of technology, we use a lot of games. This is for the younger kids. But going back to the connecting generations, which to me is extremely important. The soccer, Matthew, you are on target. If we can have clinics and connect, and you can get, like when Portugal won the World European Taça, everybody, I was teaching at the time, every student of mine was Portuguese, even the Irish kids. They're all Portuguese. They all raised their hands. I'm Portuguese. Red hair, freckled, they were Portuguese. So yes, those things really, really connect. Those events, obviously it's pride. And that's what's really important, is to introduce and to keep that Portuguese pride alive. Another way that we do it is, believe it or not, is through cooking and culinary. The old saying that, going to something about you cook, happy wife, whatever, happy husband, doesn't matter. But cooking, we do a cookbook where the kids have to cook at home with the grandparents. They take pictures, whatever they cook, we do the cookbook. So, and then we translate the Portuguese and English, but just that little bonding with the parents. And from that comes another project where they ask their grandparents, where are you from? How did you get here? Why did you come here? And then they get really curious about their family, of how they become, because a lot of them have no idea. I was one of them. My father was one of the founders of Casa dos Açores here in Fall River. I didn't know until maybe 4 years ago, because he was out there in the community, and I was a teenager. I was too busy being a teenager. And at that time, I'll be honest, I wanted nothing to do with Portuguese. So, because I really didn't know. That's one way. Another thing, I'm lucky because New Bedford has an immigrant assistance center that has an elderly group. So I do a summer program. So they come to us, and for this year, it was crochet. If you go on our website, you see the elderly group crocheting. When they came, some of the teachers like, oh, I don't know if the boys are going to want to crochet. Are you kidding me? The boys at break time were like, can we crochet? Can we do the crochet? So that there's a connection, and there's a sense of respect for the elderly. And somehow when they talk, they'll listen. They have these really, these soft spoken voices. The folkloric dance. Yes, we have a folkloric group. It's the little kids, but our musicians, our singers are the old kids. but we try to do, so we did a student exchange where we went to San Miguel, Escola Água do Pau, we did that. Our students have gone to Parlamento Jovens, which is open right now. You guys should all, we're gonna try, should all try it too. If you know, if anybody has a Portuguese school, we're gonna give it a try again. So these experiences are really important, but you need to connect with the culture before you connect with the language. You cannot get these kids to learn the language if they don't appreciate the culture. You can shove language anywhere, it's not going to happen. They need to understand the traditions, they need to like them, they need to think, oh, this is really, even if it's a first, you know, the little four-year-old singing a Loja do Mestre Day and think it's a lot of fun. That's something, believe it or not. And of course, like I said, there's the soccer and there's the folkloric and there's the culinary. But I tell parents all the time, if you have a chance to send your kids to Portugal to live, and sometimes we think, oh, we don't want our kids to go, but to live with a relative, it's a grandparent, take that chance, send your child, go get them after, even if it's 3 weeks a month. That's the best gift you can give your child. It's a summer in Portugal. That's going to bring, that's going to open doors for a lot of opportunities for a lot of those students. But like I said, the language, Linda, you're right. The language is so, so important. But forcing kids to learn the language without showing them the beauty of the culture and the traditions has not worked for us. We do a lot of community service too with the kids. We do food donations, we get involved. A folkloric group does go around and perform. They've been stuck for the last 2 years because of COVID-19. So they're gonna have their first performance. They lose their shoes while they're dancing. Anything can happen, but it's okay, they're kids. And we tell them about the dance, well, I don't, the director does. Why is that dance like that? Why do they turn to the left? What does the song mean? And they like it, but we make it fun. That's really important. You have to get them that way when they're 4, 5, 6. Then when they get to 8 and 9, you start teaching them the other things that, by then they're hooked anyways, right? So that's how we do it. That's my formula. I mean, I'm sure there's better ones out there, but that's the best that we do here in New Bedford.
That's a wonderful formula through the culture and through the interests of everything from sports to, at that age, what's important, of course, and trying different foods, and is a good way to bring in the language, obviously. Esmeralda, of course, being in Vancouver's a changing community. It's very integrated, and that's part of our issue as we integrate more and more into the American and Canadian mainstream. We lose cultural elements. Integration is great. It brings us lots of different opportunities, but there is a loss. That's just something we have to deal with. We have families here that immigrated at the same time that we did in the 1960s, who were my age, 9, 10, 11 years old when they immigrated. They no longer speak Portuguese because their parents made a choice for the parents to learn English to be successful in their fields that they were going into. And so the idea was learn English from their kids at home and as they went to school, and then themselves, and they made a cognitive decision to change, their language patterns from Portuguese to English, and being that a lot of immigrants my age lost their language. But in Vancouver, of course, it's a community that's integrated quite a bit. It seems like the communities out west, because of how they're dispersed, they integrate into the American or Canadian mainstream. How do you see the connections between the various generations, and in your case as well, using writing? And I know that you have a movement there in Vancouver, Palavras. And so how do you bring, the culture that way, whether it be in Portuguese or in English, but how do you bring the writers and the culture to the young generations and mix in and connect with all generations that maybe distance from not just geographically speaking, Vancouver and the west coast of the United States is very, very far from Portugal and from the islands, but also in as the younger generation moves forward. So tell us a little bit about your experience and your take on that.
Yeah, thank you. I was thinking as everybody was talking, how to maintain culture in a community that's dispersing, and ours in Vancouver is dispersing. So if you're familiar with Vancouver, I mean, it's Surrey, it's Burnaby, and they're far. So I agree with everything that was said, language, cooking, connection to the homeland and soccer. And I think of my own kids who are now adults. So they're not fluent in Portuguese, but I hope when I'm not around, I hope they speak. They're very shy to speak in front of me, but I think language is really important. And I think culture is so tied to identity. And so I think that they feel at least half Portuguese, which they are. But so I was thinking for us in Vancouver, that it's important not to be insular with our community, like to not just say, this is the Portuguese culture for and by the Portuguese. So thank you for mentioning palavras, Denise, because that was one thing that I tried to do. So I founded a reading series that I call Palavras, a reading series about Portugal and the Portuguese. And we only hold it like twice a year because our community is small. But one of the things I like to do is for each event is to have people who are Portuguese or have Portuguese ancestry, but also others who are Canadian, but just have an interest in Portugal. So they've either visited Portugal and are interested that way, or they've read some of our Portuguese authors. So, you know, if we have 4 readers, for example, I like to make it half and half. And I've had people ask me, oh, you know, they're not Portuguese. Why are you involving them? And I really think that we need to make it less insular and more of a hybridization of culture, so that people are interested in, you know, so for instance, one of the readings we had was to celebrate Sofia de Mello Briner. And, you know, so then my kids were interested in Portuguese poetry, and they were looking her up, and you know, and now they know, and they're a bit more conversant in Portuguese literature and the names of, you know, Portuguese authors. So that's one small way that I'm trying, but I think that it's really important to do all of these things. We have to do it all somehow, but also intermingle, because just Portuguese, I don't know that it would fly here in Vancouver.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that will be the same in parts of California as well. We're a very older community, and we need to start with culture, as Leslie said. Even in the older generation, you need to start with culture, and then maybe we can get the language in, because indeed, it's tough, and people are busy and everything else. But I wholeheartedly, as a language teacher, all my life, agree with Linda. I mean, you lose a lot by not knowing the language, and one of our aspects here in California, which we'll discuss tomorrow, is basically the lack of Portuguese language schools. And so, you know, if you have the lack of that, it's tough to go forward. Let's continue the conversation of connecting generations, and I think that one of the aspects, and as we come to getting close to the end of our session, is that in connecting generations and connecting, we talked about the connection with Portugal and connection with the Azores. And one of the things that I'd like to look at is a couple of action items, and maybe based on your experiences and based on what you have done, whether it be palavras, whether it be discovery, whether it be casas de Açores, etc. How do we move forward with connecting the generations and getting Portugal and the Azores or the autonomous regions? And Matthew can speak to this as well, because he's there often, so he has kind of a home in both worlds. But that's a unique case, Matthew. You know, I would say that 99.999% of Canadians of Portuguese background, or Americans of Portuguese background, don't go to the Azores 2 or 3 times a year like Matthew does. So most folks haven't even been to the Azores when it comes to second, third, and fourth generations, or mainland Portugal or Madeira. And so how do we, other than having SATA workforce, free of charge, which that's not going to happen, how do we connect these generations to Portugal, and how does Portugal connect with its communities? I feel, and that I'm going to throw that out, and please feel free to disagree with me. And all my connections with the various generations here in America and the generations in Portugal, and I mean America, North America, Canada, and U.S. We have. I feel Portugal still does not understand the communities. I feel Portugal still does not understand who we are, and basically, I keep on saying that the English language, the lack of Portuguese cannot be, for younger generations, and generations that are distant from Portugal, as far as second, third, fourth, cannot be a barrier to knowing Portugal. So Portugal also has to open up, because I mean everybody does speak English in the younger generation in Portugal, as you all know. And so how do you look at that? And from all of your aspects, how do you look at the connection with Portugal, and how do we move, as it was said in an earlier session today, how do we move Portugal along with us? Because some people feel that we are way ahead in a lot of different aspects, as far as the mixing of identities, as far as the cultural outreach with other communities, the mixed marriages, et cetera, et cetera. We're kind of ahead. How do we move the powers to be, or in this case, the powers in place in Portugal, to the new communities? How do they also understand? How do we get them to understand who we are? That we are not our parents or our grandparents or our great grandparents' generation. We are Canadians, we are Americans with a Portuguese flavor, basically. But most of the younger generations do consider themselves American here in the U.S. and Canada, Canadians, and then of course of Portuguese or other ancestry. So in your dealings, and I'll start with you, Matthew, again, in your dealings with the Azores, and I know you have all these great, crazy ideas that turn out to be great ideas, but how do you feel? Do you feel, first of all, does Portugal understand its communities in the essence of it, beyond the traditional organization and the traditional Procissão do Santo Cristo or Nossa Senhora de Fátima or whatever? Does Portugal, do you feel that the powers in Portugal, the elites, the governing elites, obviously, in Portugal, and cultural elites, understand the communities, and how do we move, and if they don't, how do we move forward? What do we need to do here to bring Portugal on board with us?
Definitely agree with you there. No, I don't believe they do not understand the communities well enough. They know the mercado de saudade, our older generations, our grandparents and parents, and what they like, and how to bring them back, how to bring them to invest as well in Portugal, but not necessarily the younger generations. And no, they do not do a good job in promoting Portugal to the younger generations. I think Sarah's idea of a birthright trip is fantastic. Definitely, I just tagged our Consul General of Portugal in Toronto in my post, so hopefully he'll see that and we can get the ball moving on that. I was involved in a conference as well with the youth. It was a while ago. I was about 17 at the time, and it was great. I mean, there was about 20 of us from all over the world in the Azores in a hostel, and they had different presentations, and we were, up drinking all night until, 6 in the morning, because that's what you do in Portugal. Such an amazing opportunity, but then that stopped. It didn't get promoted year after year. Where was the funding for that? And also, like to Leslie's point, promoting Portugal outside of our community is important, right? And people that love Portugal that aren't Portuguese. Madonna, for example, who adores Portugal, and Fado and her sons in Benfica, and everyone, oh yeah, Madonna likes Portugal, it's cool. Stories like that, bringing success stories, successful Portuguese, Canadians, Americans, and that happen to be Portuguese, and having them promote Portugal, I think would be a fantastic starting point for our Portuguese governments and elites and those with those responsibilities. And also rewarding Portuguese Canadians, Americans properly are also opportunities that can help promote Portugal those that have actually done something on the front lines and not just the doutores and doutores, and therefore, with no offense to any of the doctors here on the panel. Here in Portugal, I'm a doutor, even though I'm not, but everybody in Portugal is a doutor. So I'm hoping that answers the questions. I've been really interesting conversations and listening and taking a lot in. A lot's been said. Love Leslie's points on connecting the youth as well into the Portuguese language and stories and things like that generation is excellent.
One quick question, Matthew. In your generation and your friends and your group of friends, and I'm sure you have friends who speak Portuguese perfectly like you, but you also may have friends in Toronto and throughout Canada that don't speak Portuguese as well as you do, or may not even know some Portuguese at all. Do you feel that those who don't are a bit more distant from the culture?
Absolutely, it's a barrier, and especially I see it in my cousins, right? I'm one of the only people in my family that can actually have a full conversation with my grandparents in Portuguese, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to teach myself Portuguese, was so that I could hear their stories, listen to them, and I feel for my cousins who actually, probably will never have that full conversation or know where they came from, the struggles they went through to put food on the table and to make a life for themselves. And I see it with my uncles and aunts not passing the language on to their kids. They'll say a few words here and there, but they also didn't get it as immersed, and they also immersed themselves in Canadian society, so didn't really pass that on. I think education starts at the home. It is the parents having to bring their kids with them to Portugal on that summer trips like that was talked about here. That is so important because they're going to see it and feel it firsthand. These cultural exchanges, student exchanges, let's send Canadians, let's send Americans over to Portugal to learn Portuguese for 3-6 months a year program. Let's start scholarship programs like I have through the Federation in bringing Azorian students to the University of the Azores for a year and taking whatever course they want to take, but they're living that experience for a whole year. So I think more programs like that need to happen, because nothing like seeing it, feeling it, learning it full, firsthand, right? Absolutely is important.
Indeed. And so we'll take a little bit different take now. We'll go from, thank you, Matthew, from Matthew to Linda. Linda, you just spent a good amount of time in the Azores and the island of Terceira. And so how do you see the role of governments and the role of cultural entities and even our organizations here in the United States and Canada? We can pick on Luso since we're part of the Luso family. Our organizations that have some political clout, that have also some financial clout, have to take, from my perspective, maybe a different look at this. And maybe instead of just giving a $500 scholarship that pays, as we know, 2 books at the university level, sometimes not even 2, maybe you say, no, we're going to give 750 or we're going to give 1,000, but that is for you to spend on an airline ticket to spend 3 weeks or whatever it is in a part of Portugal. So how do you see the role between, of course, there and being there and going to the supermarkets and going to the restaurants and going everything? How do you see the natives, the indigenous, as I call them, and myself being one of them? How do you see the folks in the Azores, and in particular United Terceira? How do they look at the community? What is your take on that?
It was fascinating being able to be there. We were there for 9 months, and so it was great. I could spend time at my home and working on my home and working on my own language as well. I met a lot of expats, and these are people who aren't even Portuguese, who are living on the islands and loving the culture. So I loved what Esmeralda, when she talked about how they don't have to be Portuguese to have the appreciation for the culture. In my intercultural communication classes, I give a lot of examples of my culture because I'm passionate and excited about my culture, and I've studied and tried to learn about what things mean and why we do them. And I think that's excited the students to look into their own culture. And certainly my Portuguese students are very excited, but I find my Hispanic students, my Irish students, all those students get excited about looking into it. There's been a big push to look at family trees, with Ancestry.com and 23andMe. And I find that's given people kind of a push to figure out things about their heritage. You know, I was at the supermarket in the Azores. I think I told you this, Denise, and I ran into somebody wearing a Fresno State Bulldog shirt and a sweatshirt. And I was like, Fresno State? And she had been an exchange student who had gone to the university, a group of university students from the island who had gone to Fresno. And I think those kinds of programs, especially with young people, getting them to enter, but it would be nice for them not only to go, but to have that reciprocity that Sarah was talking about, then having the students go back and get to see their place. In a way, it would be great to have the university students host students from the United States and Canada and show them their island, what's beautiful about it, what they love about their island, and then have those same students go to America or Canada and get a tour as well, led by the students. I mean, I know professors, you have to be probably present, but sometimes we need to step aside and let these young people talk about the beauty of their country from their perspective, because I think they're going to connect more with it. And I have to keep going back to language. I was at my home and a little old woman came to see me because she knew I was there. And I don't know this woman, but she knew my family. And she told me that 2 houses above my house was my great-grandparents' vacation home. And I didn't know this. So those little stories I would have never known if I didn't speak the language. And that made me feel more connected to where I bought my house, because I knew that, you know, probably my father and my grandfather played 2 doors above where my house is. I think a lot more, I just keep going back to what Sarah says. I think they just need to go. They need to go and they need to hang out with people their own age and see what's there. If there's any way we could do that. I know we can't get SATA to just pay for it, so I'm not
No,
sure.
yeah.
The government can.
The government indeed can, and I think our foundations here can do a job in that aspect, and even folks who are in both in the United States and Canada, some of our mega millionaires, and I'm all happy that they are mega millionaires, but they can also invest in something like that. I mean, I think it's just we just have to think about it, and as our keynote speaker this morning, Catherine Vash, said, and I quote, "Let's not be right, let's be amazed." And so let's just be amazed by it, and let's if we are amazed if we're wanting to be amazed instead of worrying about being right, we will build these programs. And I think that there is enough will, as Matthew said, if by us also applying some pressure to the government, to the private sector in both ends, and to the municipalities. Sometimes the municipality, for example, in the Azores, we have an exchange program with Fresno State, as Linda said. It's 5 students every year. 5 students. It's with the Terceta campus because it's our campus at Fresno State, our College of Agriculture, our Jordan College of Agricultural Science and Technology, and our students, of course, enjoy it tremendously. And 5 of our students that went, 4 of them were not Portuguese, so only 1 was Portuguese. There were 2 Indian Americans whose parents own land here and are in agriculture. But the students from there got a lot, I think, even more than ours that went there, from the aspect that they were able to actually, they said, you know, it's a different, we have a working campus. So we have a 2,000-acre campus. And so they actually got to milk a cow after they were in the theory class. You know, they actually went to do the practicum part of the course. And so indeed, I think that there is enough. If we are amazed by it and not worry about doing it right or wrong, I think we can get there. So Sarah, your thoughts on that as well. Your birthright is a wonderful suggestion, and your thoughts on connecting these generations, and what can, in your research and talking to people, and of course in preparing for your doctorate, What do you think that Portugal, the Azores, Madeira, all of Portugal can do to build coalitions with us here in the United States to have a better connectivity? And do you feel that in your studies and in your research with the community, because you dealt with issues of identity and you dealt with issues of bilingualism, do you feel that folks, if they lose the language, their identity is at stake in some ways? Or what was your reading on that?
Yeah, thank you. I think, firstly, I think that Portugal, we're all very lucky because at this point in time, Portugal is in right now. It seems to be on the, the top lists of all of the, European spots to hit, and, eco travel across the Azores and Madeira. So there is sort of, we have a leg up there in terms of selling this, at least to people who are into tourism and traveling. I do agree with what's been said before, that there could be more connections and better connections made. From my observations, I noted that, Casa dos Açores does really good things. They actually connect with one another across the diaspora, and they have conferences and international conferences with one another that I haven't seen with some of the organizations that I interviewed from the mainland, for example. But I think that this is all, there's always potential for connections and always potential for doing better and growth. In terms of the question about identity and bilingualism, it was interesting because some of the participants that I interviewed were transnationals who had lived in both Portugal and Canada over their lifetime. And they kind of experienced what we've experienced on this panel, where they lived back and forth or there and back. And when they returned to Canada, I interviewed one gentleman who said that Toronto's Portuguese community is like in a time capsule. And I thought that was such a fascinating example or phrase that he used to explain what he was observing, because he didn't relate to the community in the same way, or to Portuguese-ness or Portugalidade, or whatever the term we're using. He didn't understand what was being represented in the community here. And so for some of the participants that I interviewed, they don't teach Portuguese to their children. Other ones do, because they do have more of that back and forth connection. They travel for work, or they came back because of the European downturn in 2008. So they found themselves coming back to North America. Some of them actually going through the United States and then ending up in Toronto. So that in terms of bilingualism and identity, I do think they are connected. Absolutely, they're connected. Having that connection with your language and your mother tongue really does enforce or reinforce your identity. But I also think that embedded in that is the culture as well, as been mentioned by others on the panel. So I think that language and identity are like soul sisters, and they kind of work together. And having one and not the other is like missing a part of, the sun and the moon. They kind of they go together. So I know that there is more for connections. I don't know if that would be in higher ed. I know that many colleges and universities do have really cool exchange programs that could be fostered or developed in more ways with Portuguese language programs, with even cultural programs, even geography programs. I've heard and seen Go Global programs at UBC where this occurs. So there is so much potential, and Denise, I agree. The government, private, lovely good Samaritans, people who want to give back and reciprocate. There's always potential for that.
Indeed, and that's a very good point. Folks who have been successful in both Canada and the United States, and who want to give back. And sometimes we just don't have the proper channels or the proper ways in order for them to connect. And they can see that, I can tell you that in any kind of endowment kind of a process, and that could be something that we could work on, an endowment that would that would work with Portugal, and in this case, even directly with the Azores, for the birthright visit, because one of the things, and those of us in higher ed know this, one of the things that in endowment programs that I've seen, we have a very successful one, not in Portuguese, unfortunately, but in the Armenian studies at California State University, Fresno. And it's just the awe of the folks who gave to that endowment when they meet students who actually study Armenian and went to Armenia for the very first time, and how they feel such a pride that, hey, it was a lot of money that I gave here, but look at this connection that this group of young people were able to do. So I think we can pull together private and government funding to do something of the mega scope that would be an impact on the Portuguese community, the diaspora in North America. Esmeralda, when we look at these connections and when we look at Portugal and we even with Palavras, we're in the literary world, especially also, and we have an event coming up on Friday, but in the literary world, sometimes there isn't a lot of investment in both sides of the Atlantic. We don't see a lot of we see the famous Portuguese writers being translated to English because they are being translated because they're well known and the publishing house will pick them up and they'll sell quite a few thousand books. But we don't see the writers, for example, from the Azores or Madeira, smaller archipelagos, being translated to English, and we don't see the work of Portuguese American and Portuguese Canadian writers in the Azores, which I feel is a miss, because I think the Azores are not the same Azores without the diaspora. Just in the United States, there's 750,000 people who claim to be of Azorean ancestry. That's 3 times the population of the Azores. And what is it in Ontario? There's over 300,000 Azoreans. So that's way over the population of the Azores as well. Esmeralda, how do you see that? I mean, in order, from a literary aspect, are there a couple other connections that would be important? Because if the Azoreans are going to know the diaspora, they need to know about our writing and vice versa. Any thoughts on that aspect, or any of the other things that we talked about, obviously?
Yeah, I mean, in my dreams, I had actually started looking into funds through the Canada Council to foster some kind of exchange, hoping that there would be some to bring Azorean writers here as well. But that's going to be very few. And as I hear everybody talking, I think, yes, we need exchanges, we need funds, we need funding opportunities, we need scholarships, we need all of that. But I think we also need just opportunities. And so, for instance, when my kids were still in university, I looked for opportunities for them to go study language there because they were interested. But wouldn't you know, so I'm going to say, more than funds, I think we need some user-friendly websites, because here I speak Portuguese fluently, and I would look at these opportunities and I could not follow them, and I would end up giving up because I just couldn't do it. So I think that to attract people from here to go there, we need something that's a little bit easier to follow, and not just Google translated, right? So I think we need some North American speakers of Portuguese to put that in English in a way that will attract English speakers who want to learn Portuguese or that language, but something that, and whether it's through writing or food courses or just geography, like anything, but I think it needs to be simple and easy to access, and, some funds for some people to go with funding, but, others may have full-time jobs that they can pay their own way. So could we mix those up again as well? But I think a great barrier for me anyway, as a bilingual speaker, has been just trying to navigate opportunities and websites, and haven't done it. So
that's a very good point, and a very good point in the aspect that, as you said, use the community, those in education and around education and in writing and in the arts, use the know-how of the Portuguese American and Portuguese Canadian community to reach a North American audience, because a lot of times the marketing tools and the communication tools, as Linda would vouch for that, are much different in Europe than they are, of course, in the United States and Canada. So, and we have the know-how here. You can reach communication and education leadership and people in the arts that could make it to where that is more North America friendly and not an European twist, because it's a different mindset.
And I think the Linda, you probably know this way better than I do, but the lingo is different, right?
Sure.
So
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
Indeed.
Anyway,
Indeed.
And it
Indeed.
doesn't translate. You can't do Google Translate because you're missing something.
Sure.
And
Or
that
the
becomes the
Brazilian
problem.
version.
Yeah, and even culture will play into that because, I've looked at some of the Portuguese sites and they're very, very bureaucratic in a way that I just, and convoluted. And, it works for people who are used to that there, but here I just, draw a blank. So, and anyway.
Indeed. And so to end this part of it, we'll turn to Leslie, but let her finish her drink. Leslie, in your aspect and in discovery language and all of your work there, these connections and how do you see us moving
God, it wasn't
forward?
me.
Oh,
You froze a little bit. Good. It wasn't just me this time.
okay. So how do you see these connections, Leslie, and everything that's been said, and how do you see the community, Portugal, looking at the community? I mean, you have to deal with Portugal in a lot of ways, having a school, and so what are your thoughts there?
I do. I personally, and from I guess I'm closer to Portugal than you guys are. Because of that, I get a lot of visits. But I, just like Matthew, I don't think that Portugal does enough to invest in our efforts to promote the Portuguese language and culture. We are working really hard here to promote our language, to promote our culture. And I mean, it's we have support from Instituto Camões. They are awesome. They are unbelievable with us. I have to say that. But to say that there is a financial support to help us, there isn't. Sometimes I think of Dr. Seuss, the places you would go. If we had money from Portugal, I always think, oh my God, the places I could go, the places we could go. We can't. We're very, very limited, and the funds that I get to run the school are not the big one, not the big ones, but the major. And I'm not talking about the $500,000 in like you brought up a little while ago that we get from an organization here and there. But when I need something to do something big, it's not Portuguese organizations that are giving it to me. And sometimes that saddens me to think that there's other organizations there that have more faith in us to be teaching and promoting our language and our culture, that they're not of Portuguese descent, or they are, but it's so far removed, but they still have that faith. You have to have someone that really believes in your mission. You have to get lucky. But I think we can do so much better. I think Portugal can do so much better investing in us on this side. Yeah, they come here, they see the schools. I'm sure that happens to you. They see the work. Oh, you guys are doing a great job. Keep going. But then they go back to Portugal. We're here once again, working, struggling, trying to do everything that we can to promote the Portuguese language and culture. But we could do so much more if we had their support. We really, really could go an extra mile or two if we had. Financial support is very, very important, because without financial resources, there's only so much you can do with these kids.
Indeed, and that's something that we all need to work on, and collectively. And I think in the community, sometimes we all get in our own little world, and we do what we do, at this, at this university, at this college, at this school, at this business, and we need to think a little bit more holistically, because it's what involves what is important for Vancouver is important for Southern California and for Massachusetts and Toronto. We have a lot of the same common issues around language and around culture. And I promised you about an hour to an hour and 15 minutes. It's been a little bit over that, but I want to thank each and every one of you. for being here today. We would like to continue these conversations and maybe even explore them on one-on-one in the future as well. We can't resolve the problems of the world and the problems of the Portuguese American experience and the Portuguese Canadian experience in an hour and 15 minutes, but there's been some very good thoughts and a lot of notes that I've taken myself here. And I believe that the important thing is to continue the process of connecting all generations. Just with a little bit of a story, a couple of, as Leslie mentioned, we get the visits from Portugal. We also get them here, even though we're far away, but we get the visits. They like California, and as they should. And so just not too long ago, we had part of an exchange program. We had a dignitary from the Azores here, and it was a part of the of a farm program. And at the end, we had a dinner. I mean, we participated in a dinner that was part of the event. And at my table, three people with Portuguese names, Menezes, Parreira, and Silveira. And so I asked them, Portuguese, and they said yes. And I said, from where? One of them knew, the other two did not. They said, I think from the Azores. And I said, who immigrated? All three of them, it was their grandparents. And one of them knew that the grandparents were from São Jorge, and they did not know the village or the freguesia, but they knew it was from São Jorge. The other two did not. One of them thought maybe, and I told him, well, Parreira has to be from Terceira because it's a very big name in Terceira, is Parreira. But Silveira can be from many islands of the Azores, and they did not know, And I said, I actually came home and told my wife, I have two grandchildren. I said, I don't care, but I'm taking those kids to see where I was born, because it's such a loss that, it was their grandparents. It was not their great-great-grandparents. It was their grandparents who they knew, but they had no idea where they had come from. They knew it was, and that's, we get a lot of here in the West Coast when we ask students, especially in my language classes, if they're Portuguese, and they say, yeah, we're Portuguese, das Ilhas. That's the only words they know how to say in Portuguese, das Ilhas, and they say it all together, das Ilhas, like it's one word. And so they identify with the Azores, but they don't identify with, where they're from and how that connection is. And so anything that you can do, I thank all of you for your time. I thank all of you for your work. I hope that we can continue this dialogue. I hope that we can be all inspired and amazed by Leslie's work, as I am, and Sarah mentioned as well. And those of you who know, those of you who don't know her work, check it out. And everything that everyone is doing, what Esmeralda's doing in Vancouver, of course, Matthew with Sarah's, doing a PhD, with the Portuguese theme is not probably the most popular thing in the world, but it's important that we do that. It's important that we mainstream our culture a little bit more, and I would ask that we continue this dialogue and talk a little bit about that. So how do we also, maybe the next time we meet together, how do we mainstream more and more of what we're doing? That's something that we need to talk a little bit more in more detail. So thanks to all of you. Thanks to Chairman Joseph Resendes. And Joseph, a last final thought from you before we say goodbye.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, I was here today all day attending these sessions, and so I was asked to basically make some closing thoughts, and I'd like to do that at this moment, not only for you, this panel here, but everyone else out there listening as well. And basically, I wrote a few words. Good afternoon and good evening, depending on where you are listening to this conference. I want to take this opportunity to thank Denise Borges for once again planning the Luso American Education Foundation annual conference. Without him, this conference could not have been realized, as well as last year's, because this is the second year we're doing this over Zoom. Today was a very full day, and to recap, I would like to say a few words about today's events. I was very happy that this conference started today on Wednesday, as today is my day off. Although I retired 3 years ago from Luso American Financial, I now have a new job that I love dearly, and that is taking care of my granddaughter. And today is my day off, so I have been present throughout this day. And also, since I take care of my granddaughter, she turned 1 last week, so it's time for me to start teaching in Portuguese. In the opening session, I had the opportunity to listen to remarks from our new Consul General, Mr. Pedro Pinto, the Vice President of Search, Mr. Artur Lima, and the message that they conveyed was a common message. And that is the need and the importance of promoting our Portuguese language, connecting with our Portuguese culture, and connecting with our youth. This was their main goal. Then our foundation president, Bernice Pelicas, provided an overview of our society's mission, which is to provide scholarships and grants. Also, the fine words from Dean Chapman of Fresno State College of Arts and Humanities, welcoming the foundation and Denise Borges for all that it does, not only at the Fresno State, but also for the Portuguese community at large. And thank you for recognizing Denise for all that he does for the community. Then there was a conversation with Mr. Eduardo Sergio, a founding member of the foundation conference, in which he provided the historical overview for the past 45 years of the foundation conference. The keynote speaker this morning, Catherine Barr, she did a great job. And I'm not sure if she remembers, but I actually met her 30 years ago at her house, her parents' house, when I went there to visit her parents at least to try to sell some insurance from Luso American. And when I left there, she had given me, or the father gave me the book, Portuguese in California, which I read, yes. Then there was a panel titled Today's Portugal and Diaspora. It consisted of Deb McCabe, Gonçalo Souza, Zé Luis da Silva, and Michael de Matos, a wider breadth of expertise and knowledge. Each of their presentations sharing their view was very inspiring. The message was that the next generation have a lot of work to do if we are to be here tomorrow. In the afternoon session, Diaspora dos Estados Unidos and Canada, the discussion focused on reflections of our community, teaching of the Portuguese language and opportunities in today's difficult involving our youth. And of course, this session kind of followed the same thing as well. So basically, to take out today's presenters, I can summarize this in two categories. And we must involve our youth in teaching the Portuguese language and culture to our youth. We must do those two things, those two categories. If not, we probably be like, maybe another nationality here in the United States. And it is critical that we do that. And in conclusion, I want to thank all of you that participated in the first day of our conference, and to all of you that are listening via Zoom, Facebook Live, and TVP. The conference continues until Saturday, and I hope you all can continue to attend and invite your friends to attend as well. I want to wish all of you a good night and good evening. And then tomorrow I will be back to my job, babysitting. Thank you, everyone.
And teaching Portuguese to your
You bet.
granddaughter. And teaching Portuguese to your granddaughter. Thank you all very, very much. It was inspiring. We got some some great ideas, and we need to keep the dialogue going. Thank you, especially to Matthew, for staying up so late. It's appreciated. Thank you all very much. Muito boa noite para todos. Obrigadíssimo. Abraço.